So Politics 101 was about us understanding ideologies and trying to think of a better way to think about or analyze issues that are political in nature, right? It's giving us a more systematic way of thinking about the things that that happen around us. Now, in Politics 102, it's more of we're going to try to apply our ideology and how we assess certain government officials. We talked about in Politics 101 how it's very important for us to always hold our government officials accountable for what they say or do or promise, because that's the only way we can make democracy work. Our duty does not start and end with us casting a vote during elections. After our government officials become elected, as the governed, it is our job to make sure that they're doing their jobs as well. Okay? So let's try to set some objectives and expectations for this presentation. Number one, we're going to try to understand. We're going to try to understand the importance of accountability in government. Now, this word gets thrown around a lot, especially when it comes to democracy, the word accountability. And today we're going to try to unwrap that word and try to see why it's vital for a democracy to have accountability in order for it to function. Next, we're going to generate discussions on pressing national issues. So there's no way that we're going to be able to come up with good ideas on how we can move forward as a country unless we're willing to talk about these ideas. And how do we talk about these ideas is when we have discussions, and these discussions should have a certain level of depth and comprehension to them that are not shallow or have no effect at all on how the society is going to turn out. Okay. Next, we're going to assess the current state of our government. We have to figure out if it's doing well, if it's doing badly. If it's doing well, then what are the things that we can do to make sure that it maintains that kind of pace? If it's doing badly, what are the things that we can do to try to correct or to make certain the necessary changes? And lastly, we're going to try to create a framework for us to judge our future electoral candidates. Okay, everyone with me? So, who is President Duterte, and why do people vote for him? You might be familiar with a common tagline that the DDS, or the diehard Duterte supporters, have, is they say now 16 million strong, or 16 million people voted for him. In the Philippines, that is not considered a majority, because in the Philippines it's not a two-party system, meaning you're never going to get a majority in this election because of the number of candidates that are there. Instead, in the Philippines, what we have is a plurality. The difference between a majority and a plurality is a majority is always 50% plus one, but a plurality is merely someone who gets the lion's share of the votes. Okay, but there's still no denying the fact that he is one of the most popular presidential candidates to have graced the political landscape in modern history. Okay, so we're going to try to unpack the persona of Duterte and who he is as a president. We're going to try to figure out what made him so popular, and we're going to try to understand or try to assess if he lived up to that hype. So let's try to assess the current state of the Philippine politics. Number one, it's a lot of personality-based politics in elections. I don't have data, I don't have statistics to back this up. It's purely anecdotal, but if I'm going to walk up to a random citizen, a member of the masses, and ask them who they voted for and why they voted for that person, they're most likely going to give me an answer like, oh, I don't know, he's smart, he's trustworthy, or he's very honest, he's very aggressive, or an answer of that nature. So if you ask a Duterte supporter, why did you vote for Duterte? You guys can also chime in the comment section. Like, from what you've heard, or if you voted for Duterte, why did you vote for him? You voted for him because he's a strong man, or he has a good track record, or he's very serious, or he's an outsider. He's not a typical politician, etc., etc. You know, very seldom will you come across someone who says, "Oh, I voted for him because he has a very nice and comprehensive platform," right? So it's mostly around the persona surrounding that candidate more than the actual platform. Okay, and I would like to make the assertion that there's a problem with that, um, because well, we're going to try to tackle that later on. Another problem with the state of Philippine politics right now is the fact that there's a serious lack of citizen participation. It's not cool to talk about politics. It's not in, you know. Smart shaming is a very common thing here in the Philippines. What I mean by smart shaming, you'll often see like those memes that come out na, oh, today scientist ako, tomorrow doctor ako, tomorrow I'll be a political analyst, or stuff like that. And then they'll make snide comments like daming alam, stuff like that. And it's very discouraging to people to want to participate because you will be shamed for doing so. And that's just a very prevalent culture in the Philippines that we have to try to address also. Next, there are minimal calls for accountability from the government. Now, what I mean by this, whenever dissent is, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as dissent. There are people, there's opposition, there's dissent. There are people who are trying to say, hey, you need to do a better job. However, these kinds of reactions are often met with tumahimik ka na lang, or just obey, just try to be obedient, or stay within your lane, just be supportive and whatever. However, it's very important to understand that criticism, as long as it's constructive, should be entertained. It shouldn't be seen as something that's counterproductive or unnecessary. You can make the argument that criticism is one of the most important facets of a democracy. Okay, so if that was the current state of the Philippine political landscape, what is the ideal state of the Philippine landscape? Number one, you want platform-based elections. Number two, you want citizens who actively participate during campaigns and after. And you want criticism should be welcomed and encouraged whenever necessary. Sige, so you want platform-based elections as opposed to personality-based elections, which we'll explain later on. You want citizens who actively participate not just during campaign period, but also after, like the time in between. Imagine campaign period spans a few months and a total administration spans 6 years. So if you're just active for that few months and then you're absent for all of those 6 years, that's a lot of time that you're not playing your role in the Philippine government. So it doesn't make any sense. You can't expect to make real change when you're not active in that manner. Lastly, criticism should be welcomed and encouraged whenever necessary. Okay. Now we're going to try to delve deeper into the difference between personality-based voting and platform-based voting. Now, typically, an example of personality-based voting would be like this. He's very aggressive, or he's very honest, he speaks his mind, or he's a political outsider, so he's not going to be a traditional politician or a trapo. Those are all personality-based assessments of a candidate. Now, for an example of a platform-based standard for voting is, number one, he has a platform for eliminating crime and corruption, or he has a platform for getting rid of drugs. Okay. Now, there's a reason why I want to advocate the latter instead of the former. And that's because there. The problem with personality-based voting is very immeasurable, meaning there's no way you can measure a person's aggressiveness. It's unquantifiable. There's no numerical value that you can put to a person's honesty. And when you can't place those kinds of values to those kinds of traits and qualities, you can't hold them accountable for it. So when they get elected, you can't say hey, you were honest. I got the sense that you were honest during campaign, but you're not being honest right now. Well, it's a very abstract and arbitrary trait. So there's really no way for you to quantify or to justify your point in that manner. However, when it becomes platform-based, when he says, I will eliminate crime and drugs within 3 to 6 months, that's a real plan. That's a real platform. It's measurable. There's a time limit set. There are parameters that are set. It's quantifiable. There are metrics. So with that kind of voting, you can hold him accountable to whatever he's promising. In that sense, it's much better for you to vote for a person based on their platform, because that's the thing that you can hold them accountable to. You cannot hold them accountable to their personality because personalities can change. However, a platform is written. It's something that you campaign for. It's something that the media will document, and it's something that you can always hold the person accountable to. Okay. So today we're going to try to practice our accountability. We're going to try to grade our government, current state of government, and so if you guys have like a phone, you can take down notes on what kind of grade you're going to be giving your government. If you have a scratch paper there or whatever, I'm going to use the grading system that we used in college, where I went to college. So essentially, a 4.0 would mean you're perfect. You're doing it perfectly. Sorry. A 4.0 would mean you're doing it perfectly, meaning that platform was perfectly delivered or fulfilled. And then a 1.0 would mean, sakto lang, you're nakapasa. You reached the bare minimum, you've done what's enough, all right? And then it's up to your discretion on how you'd want to grade the in-betweens. So let's stick to 0.5 increments. Again, it's all subjective. It's all up to you on how you're going to grade them. I'm just going to present you with the actual platforms and the facts. Okay. So I picked a randomized list of different campaign promises that span different fields of the landscape of the Philippines. So we have governance, peace and order, economic development and labor, education, and sovereignty. Those are 5 different fields. And under them, you will have different specific platforms or promises that Duterte made during the campaign that we can try to hold them accountable. So we're going to try to tackle each of them one by one. And then you're going to try to give this administration a grade for each category. So 1 grade for governance, 1 grade for peace and order, 1 grade for economic development, 1 grade for education, and 1 grade for sovereignty. And then by the end, you can compute for your overall grade. All right, so let's move on. If I'm going too fast, guys, just let me know. Just feel free to chat. Okay, what's the problem with corruption? The Philippines is known to be one of the most corrupt countries in the world. It has to have one of the most corrupt governments in the world. And when there is corruption, it prevents the government from doing effective work because of all the red tape. Everyone wants their skin in the game. They want their money. They want their share. It places more power and influence in the hands of those who don't deserve it. So powerful businessmen, powerful government officials who are very corrupt, they get all of the money, they get all of the power, they get all of the influence. None of that goes to the people who actually need it, such as the underprivileged or the marginalized. And in the end, what ends up happening, the rich will keep on getting richer, the poor will keep on getting poorer. Okay, so what was Duterte's solution to that when he campaigned? Number 1, he wanted to pass the Freedom of Information Act for transparency. The Freedom of Information Act is an act that allows governed citizens of the Philippines to demand any kind of information surrounding government officials, such as their health, educational records, or and whatnot, statement of assets and liabilities, etc. He also wanted to purge the government of especially corrupt officials. So it was much similar to Donald Trump's Clear the Swamp platform, wherein he said he would fire every person who has a record of being corrupt in the government. He also said that he would pass the Ease of Doing Business Act to cut the red tape, to make it easier for entrepreneurs to start and carry on with their businesses. And then he also said he would lift the bank secrecy law for public officials. In the Philippines, there's such a thing as the bank secrecy law. The bank secrecy law means that you're entitled to privacy based on your banking transactions. So, so when you open an account, any transaction that you make in that bank account is information that only you have access to. No one else should be able to get access to that information. However, Duterte said that he wants that law to not apply to public officials because he thinks that the citizens should have access to the transactions that these officials make, just to make sure that there's no corruption going on, right? Okay. Now, what are the facts? The facts are, yes, indeed. He passed the Executive Order number 2, which was the Freedom of Information Act. It was the second executive order he passed right after he was elected. So there have been many invocations of the Freedom of Information Act since it has been passed. Most recently, a friend of mine, he demanded for Duterte's health records to be released. It was featured in the news. However, a few days ago, the Supreme Court denied that request because they deemed it to have no just cause. Okay, but in principle, Duterte fulfilled that promise. He was able to pass the Freedom of Information. Okay. The fact is also Transparency International, which is an independent organization, international organization that ranks different countries based on the level of corruption in their government, said that the Philippines got a score of 34. The scale is 0 being highly corrupt and 100 being very clean. The Philippines had a score of 34, which is the lowest since 2012. In 2018, Rappler released an article about how Duterte merely reappointed government officials who have been accused of corrupt acts and practices, and 20 officials who were fired and not reassigned to any government office were indeed fired, yes, but they have not faced any criminal charges for the accusations or the allegations of corruption that have been hurled at them. You can search that information online, it's all there. The Ease of Doing Business Act was indeed passed in 2018. Its implementation is still being carried out. So it was another promise that was fulfilled to cut down on the red tape in government offices. And currently, the bank secrecy law has not been lifted for public officials. However, there is an ongoing bill in the Senate. It was filed by Ping Lacson on June 2019, but it has not passed yet. And Duterte has not come out to support the law. He is also not allied with Ping Lacson. So it's unsure whether the administration is going to push for the passage of this law before the term is going to conclude. Okay. So on the next issue of surrounding governance is the shift to federalism. Duterte, one of the biggest selling points for the Duterte campaign was federalism. He kept on saying that he wanted to change the Philippines from a unitary form of government, which we learned in Politics 101, into a federal form of government, wherein there is a national government, but there is a national federal government, but there are also more autonomy and independence for the local government units. So he said that the problem was there was a need for the provinces to have more individualized and specialized ordinances or laws or budgeting systems in order to address very specific needs on a grassroots level. So he said, now, why would you make national legislation for all of the provinces of the Philippines when all of the different provinces have very different individual problems for themselves? Federalism would allow these different provinces or districts or regions to be able to make their own specific laws and ordinances to address their grassroots problems. Okay, it allows more mobility and freedom for local governments to act. Okay, because currently everything is subject to the guidelines that is set by the national government. He also said that there's too much centralized power on quotation mark Imperial Manila, and spread that power, using that power. Okay, so the solution is simple: allow more autonomy for local governments to enact ordinances and laws through a federalist system, separate federal and local budgeting system. So essentially, people would have to be paying two taxes now: taxes for the national government and then a tax for the local government. Okay, and then create more accountability for local government officers. So when you have a federalist government, you get to really highlight and place more accountability on the local government units because they have more power, they have more independence. Okay, and he planned to do all of this through a charter change or a change in the constitution to federalism. Now, what are the facts? The facts are Duterte did make an initial push for Congress to make the shift to federalism. However, most recently, last year, right after Alan Peter Cayetano was appointed by Duterte to become the House Speaker, he was quoted as saying, "We have to change the Constitution, whether federal or not." So what that tells us is that there is a need for charter change, but it's unsure whether Duterte is really pushing for a federalist system within the charter or not. Okay. And the latest State of the Nation address during the SONA, Duterte made no mention of federalism efforts at all. So it's unsure whether that's still in his administration's agenda. In December 2019, constitutional amendments were passed in Congress to amend the charter. The details of those amendments are to lift restrictions in foreign investments in Philippine businesses. So it's essentially going to allow foreigners to invest in Philippine businesses, extend the terms of the members of Congress to 6 years, and to limit the terms of the senators. Okay. And then it would have the president and the VP voted as a tandem during elections. So when you vote for a president during the election, the vice president candidate is also going to get that vote automatically as a tandem. So it's very similar to how the states do their elections. Now, these were all amendments that were passed in Congress in December. However, none of them have any connection to federalism. Take note that these are not official. In order for one to change the charter, there has to be a plebiscite. A plebiscite is a national election wherein Congress has to make a new constitution, essentially. So they will present the constitution to us, the people, and then like a natural election, we will vote yes or no to that new constitution. So just because they approve it in Congress doesn't mean that it's going to be a law. We have to vote for whether it's going to be a law or not. From the looks of it, with 2 years left in this administration, charter change is very much far from happening because a plebiscite in itself is going to require so much time to organize. And so it seems very unlikely that the change to federalism is going to take place. Okay, so based on those facts, based on those promises and on those facts, I would like you now to grade the government on its platform for governance. So number one was to get rid of corruption, and the number two was to establish federalism. So based on how Duterte performed, what kind of grade would you give him? You don't have to share. If you want to share, you can, but you can also just write it down on your own. All right, so again, 4.0 is perfect, 1.0 is passing, and 0.0 is failure. All right. Next, we're going to talk about crime, the issue of crime in the Philippines. Okay, and one hardline stance that Duterte really had was on drugs. Okay, Duterte said the problem and the Duterte during the 2016 campaign said that the Philippines had become a narco state. Okay, there was a real spread and proliferation of illegal narcotics in the country. So as a result, a lot of people who use drugs have compromised lives. They don't. They become poor because they lose money to drugs, or they aren't able to find proper work, or they have mental health problems as a result of drug usage. And also, a lot of drug-related crimes like murder and theft are taking place because of drugs. Okay, so what is his solution to the problem? He wanted to enact the deadly war on drugs. So it's similar to how Colombia tried to solve their drug problem back in the 80s. And it's very, Duterte's promised that it was going to be a bloody war. So arrest drug suspects and kill them if they resist, were the orders that were mentioned by the government. And he also promised to eliminate drugs in a span of 3 to 6 months. Okay. So what are the facts? The facts are, in June 2019, the PNP released a statement saying that more than 6,700 people have died as a result of the drug war. However, of that 6,700 people does not include the vigilante-style killings that have happened during the drug war. So vigilante-style killings meaning the deaths that are not the result of legitimate police operations. So mga riding in tandem and stuff like that, or mga unauthorized raids, etc. Okay. The Commission on Human Rights, or the CHR, said in 2018 that the real numbers could already be as high as 27,000 deaths as a result of the drug war. Last year, in response to criticisms for the drug war, Duterte appointed VP Robredo, Vice President Lenny Robredo, to become the drug czar because she is a very vocal opposition official. However, after 2 weeks of being the drug czar, Duterte fired her for quote unquote failing to improve the war on drugs. Okay. Most of the victims, based on studies, most if not all of the victims of the drug war have been those in the poor or middle class communities. Okay. No high profile drug person has been killed, arrested, or detained so far. And currently, drugs continue to be present 4 years into the drug war, in spite of the promise that it would be solved within 3 to 6 months. Okay. Next, on the matter of crime. So, what's the problem with crime? There's rampant crime in the Philippines spanning all social classes. So there's crime that's being committed in the richest of the rich, fraud, embezzlement, etc., to the poorest of the poor, petty theft, murder, etc. And there is just Duterte also said that there's a general lack of discipline and proper conduct among citizens and officials. Not just regular folks like you and me, but also government officials committing crimes. So what is his solution? Number one, eliminate crime in 3 to 6 months. He also said that he would bring back the death penalty for heinous crimes such as rape, murder, etc. And he also promised that he would, this wasn't something that he promised during the campaign, but he mentioned it during his first State of the Nation address. He said that in spite of his hardline stance against crime, he would always promote the rule of law and he would always enforce the human rights of people to make sure that the law is not compromised in trying to solve these problems. Okay. Now, what are the facts? The facts are there was a 21% drop in crimes from 2016 to 2017. However, it's also important. It was also noted by the PNP that homicides cases rose by as much as 14.6% during that span. If you have more later statistics, you can provide that to me because I wasn't able to find them. Duterte promised that there would be a death penalty bill for heinous crimes. However, no such bill has been approved by either the House or the Senate. And from the looks of it, it's not been deemed a priority by either the Speaker of the House or the Senate President. Statistics show also that there are studies that show that countries that have implemented the death penalty have not been effective in deterring crimes. So just because these countries have death penalties does not mean that their crime rates went down. All right. And with regards to Duterte's promise of enforcing human rights and the rule of law, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and the Commission on Human Rights all have expressed their sentiments on the Duterte administration for violating human rights in this drug and crime war. Okay, so again, based on the promises that he made during the election and based on the facts that are presented to you now, what grade would you provide the government on the drugs and crimes issues? Okay, so again, feel free to type it down if you want, or you could just in the chat box, or you can just write it down on your own. It's also okay. Okay, next we're going to move on to economic development and labor issues in the country. So the problem, sure, the Philippines has been experiencing some economic development stemming from Gloria up to Noy Noy. However, the Philippines, in spite of that economic development, the Philippines continues to be classified as a third world country or a developing nation. Also, there is still a very huge problem of income inequality. A lot of the economic development that we've been seeing, or the increase in our GDP, is a result of the rich, the Class A citizens getting richer, but it does not necessarily signify that the poor citizens of the country are getting richer, nor is the middle class strengthening also. So there is still a huge gap between the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. Okay. Also, there are also a lot of labor malpractices that continue to plague the majority of the workforce. So the middle class who are struggling as employees can't get decent jobs because corporations are exploiting or doing a lot of labor malpractices, such as endo or contractualization. Okay. Sige. I'll get to your question later. Um, so, okay. So what are the solution for those problems? Duterte promised that he would ensure food security for the poorest of the poor within 100 days. And he said he would do this by retaining Noynoy's 4P program that was headed by Mar Rojas as the Interior Secretary. The 4P program was the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program. So it's essentially dole-outs or social welfare for the poorest of the poor, giving them enough money or food to cover basic needs. It's completely free, no strings attached. It comes from the government. Okay. Also, he wanted to address tax reform to better provide social welfare for the Filipino poors, for the poor Filipino people. And he also promised to end contractualization within a week of his presidency to get rid of unjust labor practices. Okay. So what are the facts? The facts are the 4Ps remain as promised. He didn't get rid of the 4Ps in spite of the fact that it was Noynoy's project. He lauded it, he said it was good, and he's carrying it on. However, in 2018, it came out that the prices of basic goods, such as rice, have increased. Economic advisors of Duterte told him that it was the fault of the NFA, the National Food Authority was handling it poorly. However, the NFA decided to point fingers to, at that time, the Cabinet Secretary of Duterte, C. Leon Chua Vasco Jr. Instead of heeding the advice of his economic experts to address the issues within the NFA, Duterte decided to fire Vasco and replace him. Okay. As far as tax reform is concerned, yes, Duterte passed what is called the Train Law. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. So the Train Law, to put it simply, you can read it online for a more comprehensive study into it. But its summary is it lowers income tax and it places a higher tax on luxury items like cars, fuel, tobacco, and sugary beverages. Now, there are no specific allocation numbers as of yet. However, in the bill, it was placed na 30% of the revenues of the Train Law will go to social welfare programs. So to hunger alleviation, education, poverty alleviation, healthcare, housing, employment, etc. So probably the funding for 4Ps is going to come from the 30% of the Train Law. 70% of the revenues from the Train Law is going to go to the Build program of Duterte. Again, there are no specific details as to how much money is going into whatever projects. However, it said that the Build program covers military infrastructure, sports facilities for public schools, and etc. In 2018, to address the issues of his promise of contractualization, again, he promised it. He promised to end contractualization within 1 week of his presidency. However, that wasn't the case. Duterte delivered a speech in February 2018 saying that he can't force the capitalists of the country to end contractualization. Okay. In May of that same year, he signed an executive order that was marketed as an EO that would end contractualization. However, if you go through that EO, it doesn't really put an end to the practice of endo. For those who are not familiar, endo is a way of corporations or companies to get out of giving their employees benefits such as insurance or healthcare or whatever, or SSS, ganyan. Because you're only supposed to give your employees that after 6 months of employment, wherein they become eligible to become a regular employee. Endo is the practice of making contracts that are 5 months or shorter so that they never become eligible for those kinds of benefits. So the companies don't have to shell out money for that. Duterte said he is powerless and that he can do nothing to end it after all, and that it's all up to Congress to amend the labor code because his powers as a president alone are limited. Okay. So again, based on the promises that were given and the facts that were given to you, what grade would you give the Duterte administration with regards to economic development and labor? Okay. Next, on education. So education is, I had to say this, I have a very big bias towards the issue of education. there's a serious lack of infrastructure to accommodate primary and secondary school students in our public school institutions. So a lot of public schools now, they're having to deal with 50, 40, 50, 60, 70 people in a class. And that's just not a conducive learning environment. But there are just aren't enough classrooms to accommodate the demand of public education. Okay. College education is also very expensive. It's not as accessible to the masses as you want it to be. And our teachers, our public school teachers, we should all be very thankful for them, but their salaries are one of the lowest in all of the government, of all the government workers. Okay. So what was Duterte's solution to the problem? He said he would allocate funds for improvement of public school infrastructure. He also said that he would make sure to increase the salary of public school teachers. So essentially, he wanted to invest more in the educational system of the Philippines, building more classrooms, building more schools, sports facilities for public schools, and also increase the salary of public school teachers. Why? So more of our talented teachers would actually want to stay in the public sector and teach in public schools instead of going to private universities that can pay them more. Okay. Now, what are the facts? The first fact that I'm going to present was actually a promise that was not made, but it's still a success that I think deserves recognition. Duterte signed the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Act, which ensured free college education for state-sponsored universities or colleges. The implementing guidelines and budgeting for this act is still being sorted out. It's not being executed yet. They're still studying where they're going to source the money for this, but regardless, the act was signed by Duterte and it deserves acknowledgement. As you may remember from earlier, part of the revenues of the train law, 30%, is going to go to the improvement of educational facilities. However, not the exact amount of allocations remain undisclosed. So we don't know how much of that money is going to classrooms or chairs or whatnot. Okay. Also, in 2018, Duterte signed the Salary Standardization Law. Okay. For pay, the Salary Standardization Law, or SSL, because it's very long, is a law that made pay hikes for government workers, all government workers in any kind of field. So it included the teachers. Duterte promised to increase the salary of teachers, but he made the SSL to make sure that all government workers would have increased salary. Now, while that may look like a good thing, it's not necessarily a good thing for a lot of people. Yes, the SSL doubled the salaries of the police officers and military men. The exact breakdown of their salaries is online. For the people who do not know, government workers' salaries, you can access them online. Any kind of government worker, from the lowest rank to the highest rank. They have salary grades that you can search online to figure out how much they're earning every month. I didn't put them here because it would be just too much, but essentially the law doubled the salaries of entry-level police officers and military men. Unfortunately, for the entry-level teachers, they only experienced a hike of 24%, or from 20,754 prior to the enactment of the law to 22,316. And even though the SSL was passed 2 years ago, its implementing guidelines say that it's only going to be effective this year. So if you were earning 20,000 last year as a teacher, it's now going to be 22,000 a month this year. The teachers' unions and organizations have vocally expressed their disappointment at the amount of their salary hikes. There's a quote here that says, he promised a 10,000 peso hike over and above the SSL when he ran for office in 2015, and we waited for 3 years before the bill was passed in 2018. This is from Benji Basa. He was the chair of the Teachers Dignity Coalition. However, the Duterte administration defended this by saying that they were able to double the salaries of the police officers and the military men because they comprised like around 400 to 500,000 workers, whereas there are almost 1 million teachers in the Philippines. So they couldn't really increase the salary of the teachers because there were so many of them. So yes, technically, he did increase the price he did increase the salaries of the teachers. However, it did not meet their expectations. Okay. Now, again, based on those facts, what kind of grade would you provide the Duterte government on their promises for education? Okay. This is the last issue that we'll be talking about today, the issue of sovereignty. Duterte promised that he would, the problem first. The problem is there are ongoing disputes with China over the West Philippine Sea. So we know about this already, the Spratly Islands, the Scarborough Shore, wherein China is building military bases or military presence in those areas, despite of the fact that there is an international ruling that those areas are rightly ours as the Philippines. Okay, so as a response to that problem, Duterte promised that he would assert the Hague ruling, which says that we do have rightful ownership of the West Philippine Sea. And he also said in one of the debates that he would ride the jet ski to the Spratlys and plant the Philippine flag there to defend our sovereignty. Obviously, maybe that might be a joke, but I just wanted to include it there to assert the point that he was hell-bent on defending the Philippines' sovereignty. Okay. Now, what are the facts? Facts are Duterte has claimed numerous times that he has no power to stop China. In numerous speeches, he has said that he does not want to anger China because if worse things come to worse, we don't have the military to defeat them. And a lot of Duterte cabinet members, such as Roque, Panelo, they keep on saying that we do not want to anger our friends in China. We want to make sure that our friends we have cordial ties with Beijing as much as possible. Today there was an issue, or was it yesterday? There was an issue about how there was a Philippine-sponsored Wow China ad in Philippine radio, which created a lot of controversy, and that it's making people doubt whether or not Duterte is taking a hardline stance against the imperial China or not. Okay, so based on those facts, what kind of grade would you provide the Duterte government on its stance on sovereignty? Okay, so I hope you've been writing those grades down because you can now compute for the overall grade. We divided it into 5 segments. So just take all of the individual grades that you give for those same segments, and then you divide it all by 5. So example, if you graded him 1.0, 3.5 plus 0.0 plus 2.5 plus 2.0, you end up with 9.0, and divide it all by 5. So his overall grade would be 1.8 out of 4.0. Okay, so that's just a sample framework of how you would be able to grade your government. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that. There are many other different promises that we did not cover here. There are many different issues that we did not talk about as of yet. If we do it, it might be a 4 or 5 hour class. So I try to cram as many different issues as possible, spanning different fields, so that just to give you an idea of what it would be like to grade our government. Okay. Also, it's important to note that not all issues weigh the same. So if you graded him a 1.0 on crime and you graded him a 1.0 on education, just because they have the same numerical value does not mean that they weigh the same. Sometimes you might think education is more important than solving crime, right? So, or you might make the argument that, I don't know, our sovereignty is more important than economic development. So it's all dependent on who you are as a person and what your priorities are as a citizen and what the needs of the country are. Like if you're a developed country, obviously maybe economic development would not be as important as education because you're already developed. So your priority would be let's place most of our money in education so that our younger people would be more educated and maintain our status as a first world country. So it's really dependent on the needs of the nation also. Not all issues are going to have the same weight. And it's very important for you as a citizen to be able to gauge what the most important or pressing issues are. Okay. Just to be fair, also, I've decided to list an additional successes and failures that the Duterte government had. Some of his successes was he was able to extend the validity of the passport and driver's license. So passports are now valid up to 10 years and driver's licenses are now valid up to 5. As mentioned earlier, he doubled the salaries of the military and the police personnel. He also promised during his campaign that he would have Marcos buried at the libingan ng mga bayani. That's another promise that is fulfilled. Whether or not that's a good thing or not is up to you. He also promised that we would be more environmentally friendly, which in fairness to him, he signed the Paris Agreement. However, he expressed his dismay over doing so. He didn't want to sign the agreement, but he did anyway. The Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is an international fund wherein developing countries like us can borrow money from that fund and then invest it in environmentally friendly investments, like to minimize carbon footprints or to promote wildlife, to help endangered species, etc., etc. Okay. He also promised a smoking ban, and he successfully implemented one, as well as a national ID law. And then the next, for the failures, he promised that once elected, he would practice proper diplomacy and conduct. If you were paying attention during the 2016 campaign, Duterte was very fond of cursing and saying bad words in his speeches, etc., etc. But he promised that his persona during the campaign would be different from his persona as an elected official. As evidence would point out, no changes have been made on that front. He still regularly curses on TV and etc. Okay. He also said he promised that he would establish good relations with the opposition as on his desire to heal the nation. So it's national healing is what is the marketing term he labeled it as. However, he has not been very receptive of opposition, and he's not very fond of conflict and criticism. He also promised that he would only hire the best and the brightest government officials to serve under him. However, if you do a quick Google search, you will find that many of the people that he has appointed in his government have had questionable records or have already been fired as a result of their poor performances. So some notable fires were Secretary Gina Lopez. Previously, we mentioned his cabinet secretary was fired. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque was fired, and then he came back. So it makes you question on whether or not these people serving under him really are the best and the brightest. He also promised that he would put an end to the NPA rebellion. However, the communist rebellion is still at large. And he also promised that he would make sure that the expenses of the poor would not be as prevalent as before. However, the inflation rates are much higher during his administration as compared to previous administrations. Now, everything that we've talked about today should not be information that you just throw out of the other ear. It's something that you should keep at the back of your mind. Why? This is all stuff that you want to remember come the 2022 elections, okay? So hopefully today you will have been given a framework on how you can better judge and assess candidates in the next election, because there is a serious problem with the way that we demand accountability from our government in the sense that we are not doing it at all, or very few of us are. And we need to be able to build a critical mass of people who are holding our government officials more accountable by making sure that we are well aware of what they promised us and that we are well aware of how they are doing in fulfilling those promises. When we're not aware of those things, then it's our own fault. Okay, so again, I advocated for a platform-based campaign as much as possible, because this is the only way that you can hold them accountable. You cannot hold the government official accountable for their personality, but you can hold them accountable for what they promise you. Typically, how I would want to structure a platform would be a vision. So a vision is simply something like like a company vision, the mission vision of a company or an organization or whatever. A vision is something that's unattainable. It's the ideal. It's impossible to attain, but it's what you're trying to achieve. Okay. So, and then you have your battle cry. For ERAP, his battle cry was ERAP para sa mahirap. Si Manny Villar, he had this sipag at tiyaga. Si Duterte, he had the changes coming, or Bisaya na po, etc., etc. And then a lot of people end there. A lot of people will see the battle cry and then that'll be enough for them. But that's not enough. You can't be content with hearing, oh, change is coming. Okay, good, I'm sold. No, all right? You have to go and see the program of action. What does he mean when he says change is coming? What are his plans? What are his programs that are in place? And then every program of action that he has should have key reforms. So an example of a proper platform. Let's say Duterte would say, I want the Philippines, my ideal Philippines is a place that has justice and freedom. That's my vision for the Philippines. We may not get there, but it's my ultimate goal. Okay, what's my battle cry? Change is coming. Okay, so how am I going to make change is coming happen? I'm going to get rid of crime and drugs. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to strengthen the police force by increasing their salary. I'm going to criminalize drug lords and by increasing intelligence, etc., etc. I'm going to eliminate poverty. How am I going to do that? I'm going to strengthen social services. I'm going to increase taxes on the rich, etc., etc. So as a citizen, you owe it to yourself to ask all of these things and be as detailed oriented as possible. Don't stop at the vision. Don't stop at the battle cry. Don't stop at the program of action. Get to know the actual reforms, the actual plans, the specific concrete plans that they have to achieve whatever they're promising you during the campaign. Because if you don't do your due diligence, then you're just duping yourself. You're not holding yourself accountable. And you can't hold them accountable if you don't do your part. If you don't do your part, then you're part of the problem. It's just as easy as that. If you don't have the knowledge of what they're campaigning you about, and you don't have the knowledge of how they're doing things when they're in office, then wala na. No one's going to hold them accountable. No one is going to force them to do their job. That should be you. It's on you to make sure that your government officials are doing their job. So I can go to the Duterte administration and say, hey, you failed. You said that you were going to get rid of drugs in 3 to 6 months, and you didn't. You failed on that part. So when are you going to make some changes to your approach, right? I can make that claim because it's a platform that they promised, and it's a platform that I was very well aware of, and I can call them out on it. And that's the upper hand that you have as a citizen if you do your part in acquiring that kind of knowledge, okay? At the end of the day, the government isn't going to correct itself. It's up to us to correct it. And we can't do that if we're uninformed. We can't do that if we don't think critically. We can't do that if we don't take the time to do simple research, as what I've done with this presentation, and just find out the facts. What are the facts? What were the promises? And what are the facts? I'm now opening the floor for questions. I'm sorry if that was a bit long. I tried to keep it under an hour. Thank you everyone for listening to the talk. You're free to ask any questions now if you want.